A woman's scream pierced the still desert air as Hannah Griffith clutched her 6-month-old daughter to her chest, backing away from the 3 armed men who had surrounded her small homestead just before sunset. The crimson Arizona sky seemed to burn with the same intensity as her fear, casting long shadows across the dusty ground as she frantically searched for an escape. "Please," Hannah begged, her voice trembling as she tightened her grip on little Emma, whose wails joined her mother's desperate pleas. "Take whatever you want, but leave us be." The tallest outlaw, a man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jaw, stepped forward and spat on the ground. "That ain't how this works, madam. Word is your husband struck gold before he died. We ain't leaving without knowing where it's at." His eyes fell to the baby, and that little one might fetch a nice price from folks looking to adopt out east. 2 birds, 1 stone. It was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was still wild, lawless in many parts. Hannah had known the risks when she decided to stay after her husband, Thomas, died of fever 3 months earlier, but she couldn't bring herself to abandon the small ranch they had built together. Now, as twilight descended and these men threatened everything she had left, she wished she'd heeded the warnings of the townsfolk. "There's no gold," Hannah insisted, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face. "Thomas never found anything. It was just a rumor." "Liar," hissed the second man, shorter but broader than his companion, his rotten teeth visible beneath his unkempt mustache. "Everyone knows Griffith hit a pocket before the fever took him. Hand over the baby and tell us where the gold is, or things will get mighty unpleasant." Hannah clutched Emma tighter, taking another step back toward her cabin. If she could just get inside, barricade the door. The third outlaw, who had been circling around, suddenly lunged forward and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh with bruising force. "Enough talking. Take the kid." Hannah screamed again, kicking and struggling as the scarred man reached for Emma. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. The outlaw holding Hannah dropped to the ground, a red stain blossoming across his chest. The other 2 men froze, then spun toward the direction of the shot. Silhouetted against the setting sun, a lone rider appeared on the ridge above the homestead. His rifle was still raised, the barrel smoking slightly in the fading light. Without haste, the rider lowered his weapon and nudged his horse forward, descending toward the cabin with measured confidence. "That's close enough," the scarred outlaw called out, drawing his pistol and pointing it at Hannah. "This ain't your business, mister." The rider continued forward, his face becoming visible in the dimming light, strong-jawed, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. He wore no badge, but carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who knew his own mind and feared little. "I'm making it my business," he replied, his voice calm but carrying easily across the distance. "The lady and her child will be coming with me. You 2 will be riding in the opposite direction if you want to see tomorrow." The broad-shouldered outlaw spat and raised his gun. "There's 2 of us and 1 of you." A hint of a smile crossed the rider's face. "Then it's almost a fair fight." What happened next occurred so quickly that Hannah would later struggle to recall the exact sequence. The rider's hand moved to his holster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. The broad-shouldered outlaw staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. The scarred man got off a wild shot that went wide before his companion pulled him toward their horses, both men cursing and scrambling to escape. In moments, they had mounted and were galloping away, dust clouds rising behind them as they fled into the gathering darkness. Hannah stood frozen, Emma's cries the only sound as the rider dismounted and approached. Up close, she could see he wasn't much older than her own 22 years, though his eyes held the experience of someone who had seen much more of life's hardships. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Wyatt Adamson. Looks like you might need some assistance." Hannah nodded, unable to speak as relief and shock warred within her. Emma had quieted somewhat, her tiny hands clutching at her mother's dress. "They'll be back," Wyatt said, glancing in the direction the outlaws had fled. "And with more men. This isn't a safe place for you tonight." Hannah found her voice at last. "I can't leave. This is our home, all we have left." Wyatt looked at the modest cabin, the small corral with a single mule, and the patch of garden that was struggling against the desert soil. His expression softened slightly. I understand that, madam, but staying here tonight means risking your life and your daughter's. Those men weren't bluffing about taking her. Hannah's arms tightened around Emma instinctively. Where would we go? My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here. It's secure, and my foreman and ranch hands keep good watch. You'd be safe there until we can figure out what to do about those outlaws. Hannah hesitated, looking back at her cabin. Everything she and Thomas had built together was here, every memory, every dream. But as she looked down at Emma's small face, she knew there was no real choice. I need to gather some things, she said quietly. Wyatt nodded. Be quick, I'll keep watch. He turned to scan the horizon, rifle ready, giving her privacy to enter the cabin. Inside, Hannah moved swiftly, packing a small bag with Emma's clothes, diapers, and a few personal possessions. She tucked Thomas's pocket watch into her dress pocket, the only valuable thing he had owned. There was no gold, despite what the outlaws believed. Thomas had written to her of promising findings shortly before his death, but she'd found nothing when searching the claim he'd been working. When she emerged, Wyatt had already saddled her mule and attached it to a lead rope. Do you ride? He asked. Yes, Hannah replied, but not with Emma. Wyatt nodded, seemingly having anticipated this. You'll ride with me then. The mule can carry your belongings. He secured her bag to the mule's saddle, then helped Hannah mount his sturdy chestnut gelding before swinging up behind her. Emma was nestled securely between them, calmer now but still fussing softly. Hold tight, he instructed, his voice close to her ear as he reached around her to take the reins, creating a protective circle with his arms. They set off at a steady pace, the mule trailing behind. As they crested the first hill, Hannah looked back at her small homestead, silhouetted against the last rays of sunlight. A lump formed in her throat. I'll bring you back when it's safe, Wyatt said, seemingly reading her thoughts. You have my word. Hannah nodded, unable to speak. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust him beyond the fact that he had saved them from the outlaws. Yet something in his steady presence and calm assurance made her believe him. As darkness fell completely, they rode in silence across the desert landscape. Emma eventually fell asleep against Hannah's chest, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. The night air grew cool, and Hannah found herself leaning back slightly into the warmth of Wyatt's chest. Not much further now, he said, after they had been riding for nearly 2 hours. The moon had risen, silvering the landscape and providing enough light to see the trail ahead. Hannah had been fighting exhaustion, the events of the day and the constant vigilance of motherhood catching up with her. She straightened, trying to appear more alert. Thank you for your help, Mr. Adamson. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Just Wyatt is fine, he replied, and I was heading back from town when I heard the commotion. Couldn't ride past a woman and child in trouble. Still, you risked your life. Those men might have killed you. There was a slight pause before he answered. I've faced worse odds. Something in his tone suggested experiences he didn't care to elaborate on, and Hannah didn't press. Everyone in the territories had stories, many of them painful. She had her own. They crested a rise, and below them, Hannah could make out the shapes of buildings: a main house, a barn, and several smaller structures. A few lights glowed from windows, and a corral fence gleamed pale in the moonlight. That's the Broken Spur, Wyatt said. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. Upon recognizing Wyatt, the man lowered his weapon and called out a greeting. Everything quiet, Mac? Wyatt asked as they rode into the yard. All's well, the older man replied, his curious gaze taking in Hannah and the baby. Wasn't expecting company, boss. This is Mrs. Griffith and her daughter Emma. They'll be staying with us for a while. Had some trouble with Blackwater's gang at her homestead. Mac's expression darkened. Those vultures are getting bolder every day. He tipped his hat to Hannah. Madam, you're welcome here. Wyatt dismounted first, then carefully helped Hannah down, mindful of the sleeping baby in her arms. Emma stirred but didn't wake, her little face peaceful for the first time in hours. Mac, have Mrs. Lopez prepare the guest room, Wyatt instructed. And could you see to the mule? The foreman nodded and took the lead rope, leading both animals toward the barn. Wyatt guided Hannah toward the main house. a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over simple but well-made furniture. The house was clean and orderly, though distinctly masculine in its sparse decoration. A middle-aged Mexican woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Hannah and the baby. "Mrs. Lopez," Wyatt said. "This is Mrs. Griffith and her daughter. They'll be staying with us for a time. Could you please prepare some food? I'm sure they're hungry." "Of course, Senor Wyatt," she replied with a warm smile. "The guest room is always ready. I will bring up fresh water and towels." Wyatt thanked her, then turned to Hannah. "You must be exhausted. Mrs. Lopez will show you to your room. Once you're settled, we can talk more about your situation if you're up to it." Hannah nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need," he said simply. "Get some rest." Mrs. Lopez led Hannah upstairs to a pleasant room with a large bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair near the window. After bringing water, towels, and a tray of food, she hesitated at the door. "If you need anything for the bebé, Senora, please let me know. My daughter has little ones. We have everything a baby might need." "Thank you," Hannah said, genuinely touched by the woman's kindness. Left alone with Emma, Hannah changed her daughter's diaper and settled her in the center of the big bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling off. Then she washed her own face and hands, the cool water reviving her somewhat. She ate the simple meal Mrs. Lopez had brought beans, tortillas, and some kind of beef stew, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. As she rocked in the chair by the window, looking out at the moonlit ranch yard, the events of the day crashed over her. She had nearly lost Emma. They could have been killed or worse. And now they were homeless, depending on the charity of a stranger. Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet sobs shaking her shoulders as she tried not to wake Emma. She had been so strong for so long through Thomas's illness and death, through the lonely months of running the homestead alone, through every hardship the frontier had thrown at her. But tonight, the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. A soft knock at the door made her hastily wipe away her tears. "Yes," she called softly. Wyatt's voice came through the door. "Just checking if you need anything else tonight, Mrs. Griffith." Hannah composed herself and opened the door slightly. "We're fine, thank you, and please call me Hannah." In the dim light of the hallway, she could see Wyatt better than she had before. He was tall and lean, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of the sky just before dusk, a deep, clear blue. His light brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck, and he had removed his hat, revealing a face younger than she had initially thought, though no less weathered by sun and wind. "Hannah," he repeated with a slight nod. His gaze was direct but not intrusive. "I've sent one of my men to keep watch near your homestead. If Blackwater and his gang return, we'll know about it." "Blackwater, is that the man with the scar?" Wyatt nodded grimly. "Carson Blackwater. He and his gang have been causing trouble in these parts for over a year now. They started with cattle rustling, but they've graduated to robbery and worse." Hannah shuddered, thinking how close she and Emma had come to becoming victims of worse. "Why would they think Thomas had gold?" she asked. "We were barely making ends meet." Wyatt leaned against the doorframe, keeping a respectful distance. "Your husband was working a claim in the Dragoon Mountains, wasn't he?" Hannah nodded. "He was convinced there was a vein there, but—" Her voice caught. "He died before he could prove it. Word gets around in mining country. Someone probably heard him talking in town, and rumors grew from there." Wyatt's expression was thoughtful. "Did he leave any maps or notes about his claim?" Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "He kept a journal. There are some rough drawings, coordinates. But I've looked at the claim myself. There's nothing there but a half-dug tunnel and some tools." "Those men seemed pretty convinced otherwise," Wyatt observed. "Would you mind if I took a look at the journal? Might give us some idea of what they're after." "It's at the cabin," Hannah replied. "Along with everything else we own. We'll go back for your things when it's safe," Wyatt assured her. "For now, try to get some rest. You're secure here." Hannah nodded gratefully. "Good night, Mr. Adamson, Wyatt, and thank you again." A small smile softened his features. "Good night, Hannah." After he left, Hannah returned to the bed, carefully lying down beside Emma. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept replaying the terrifying moments when the outlaws had tried to take her baby, the shot that had saved them, and the strange twist of fate that had brought them here, to this ranch and this man. Eventually, lulled by Emma's steady breathing and the unfamiliar but comforting sounds of the ranch at night, Hannah drifted into sleep. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, Hannah was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her. Then Emma's babbling beside her brought everything rushing back: the outlaws, the escape, Wyatt Adamson. She rose and washed quickly, changed Emma, and dressed them both in yesterday's clothes, making a mental note to wash their few belongings as soon as possible. She couldn't be a burden on her host's generosity. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Lopez in the kitchen, kneading dough at a large table. The older woman smiled warmly. "Buenos dias, señora, and good morning to you too, little one," she added, making a funny face at Emma that caused the baby to giggle. "Is there something I can help with?" Hannah asked, looking around the spacious, well-organized kitchen. "You are a guest," Mrs. Lopez protested. "Please," Hannah insisted. "I'd like to earn my keep." Mrs. Lopez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. You can help with the breakfast while I finish this bread for later." Hannah set Emma on a blanket on the floor with a wooden spoon to play with and set to work preparing breakfast under Mrs. Lopez's direction. They worked well together, and Hannah found herself enjoying the older woman's company and her stories about the ranch and its people. "Señor Wyatt, he built this place from nothing 5 years ago," Mrs. Lopez told her as they fried bacon and eggs. "Before that he was," she hesitated. "Was what?" Hannah prompted. Mrs. Lopez seemed to choose her words carefully. "A man who traveled much. He did many jobs, some dangerous, I think, but now he is a rancher and a good one, a good man." Hannah's curiosity was piqued, but before she could ask more, Wyatt himself entered the kitchen, already dressed for the day in work clothes, his hat in his hand. "Morning," he said, nodding to both women. His eyes softened as they fell on Emma, who was contentedly gumming the wooden spoon. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Hannah replied, suddenly self-conscious in her rumpled dress, her hair hastily pinned up. Wyatt, by contrast, looked rested and capable, ready to face whatever the day might bring. "I've had word from Tom, the hand I sent to watch your place," Wyatt said, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Lopez. "Blackwater and his men returned last night with reinforcements. They searched the cabin thoroughly." Hannah's heart sank. "Did they destroy everything?" "Tom said they made a mess, but the structure is intact. They took some items, he couldn't tell what from his vantage point." "The journal," Hannah guessed. "They must have been looking for Thomas's mining journal." Wyatt nodded. "That would be my guess." "The good news is they left before dawn, heading east. Tom is still keeping watch." "What happens now?" Hannah asked, mechanically continuing to prepare breakfast despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "Now we eat," Wyatt said simply. "Then I need to check on some cattle in the south pasture. After that, if Tom reports all clear, we can ride to your homestead and salvage what we can." "You've already done so much," Hannah protested. "I can't ask you to neglect your work for us." Wyatt's expression was unreadable. "I gave you my word I'd see you safely home when the time was right. I don't go back on my promises." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument, so Hannah simply nodded her thanks. Breakfast was a lively affair, with Mac and 3 other ranch hands joining them at the large table in the dining room. The men were respectful, if curious about Hannah and Emma's presence, and the conversation flowed easily around ranch business and local news. After the meal, while Wyatt and his men went about their morning tasks, Hannah insisted on helping Mrs. Lopez with the dishes and household chores. Emma was content to explore the kitchen floor, crawling from one interesting object to another under the watchful eyes of both women. "You have a good baby," Mrs. Lopez observed. "So happy, even after such fright yesterday." "She's resilient," Hannah agreed, watching as Emma pulled herself up using a chair leg, wobbling proudly in her standing position. "Like her father was." "Your husband, he has been gone long, 3 months," Hannah replied softly. "Fever took him quickly." "We'd only been in Arizona for a year when he died," Mrs. Lopez crossed herself. May he rest with God. You are very brave to stay with a little one, Hannah sighed. I'm beginning to think it was foolish, not brave, but the homestead was all we had. Where would we go? My parents are dead, and Thomas's family back east made it clear they disapproved of his Wild West adventures, as they called our life here. And now, Mrs. Lopez asked gently, what will you do now if these bad men are looking for you? It was a question Hannah had been avoiding since the previous night. I don't know, she admitted. I need to think. Mrs. Lopez patted her hand. Think, yes, but know you are welcome here until you decide. Senor Wyatt, he will say the same. Hannah wondered about that. Wyatt had been kind, even heroic, but taking in a widow and her baby indefinitely was a different matter. She couldn't impose on him that way, regardless of how safe she felt at the Broken Spur. Mid-morning, Wyatt returned to the house. Tom sent word that your place appears deserted, he told Hannah. If you're up for it, we can ride over now and see what can be salvaged. Hannah nodded, gathering Emma, who had just awakened from a nap. I'm ready. This time, Wyatt had a wagon hitched for their journey, which would allow them to bring back more of Hannah's belongings. The ride was quieter than the previous night's journey, with Wyatt focused on driving and Hannah lost in thoughts about what they might find at the homestead. Emma, sensing the tension, was fussier than usual, and Hannah did her best to soothe her, singing softly and pointing out interesting sights along the way, a jackrabbit darting across their path, a hawk circling overhead, the distant purple shadows of mountains on the horizon. She seems to like the outdoors, Wyatt observed after Emma had calmed, watching the baby's wide-eyed interest in their surroundings. She does, Hannah agreed. Thomas used to take her outside every evening before sunset. He'd point out all the stars as they appeared and tell her their names. The memory brought both a smile and a pang of loss. He sounds like a good father, Wyatt said quietly. He was. He was so excited when I told him I was expecting, said a child was proof we were putting down roots, making something lasting. Hannah's voice caught. He only had 6 months with her. Wyatt was silent for a moment, then said, My father died when I was 12. But I remember everything he taught me: how to ride, how to track, how to be a man of my word. Your Emma will have those memories of her father too, because you'll keep them alive for her. Hannah looked at him, surprised by the insight. You sound like you speak from experience. A shadow crossed Wyatt's face. My mother did that for me and my brother after Pa died, kept him alive in our memories until it almost felt like he was still with us. Before Hannah could respond, they crested the final rise, and her homestead came into view. Even from a distance, she could see the door hanging askew and items scattered across the yard, clear signs of the Outlaws' search. As they drew closer, Tom, the ranch hand who had been keeping watch, rode down to meet them. He reported that there had been no activity since dawn, but advised caution nonetheless. Stay in the wagon with Emma until I've checked inside, Wyatt instructed Hannah as they pulled up in front of the cabin. He and Tom entered the cabin with guns drawn, emerging a few minutes later with the all clear. Hannah passed Emma to Mrs. Lopez, who had insisted on coming along to help, and then stepped inside to survey the damage. Her heart sank. The Outlaws had been thorough in their search. Furniture was overturned, her few books scattered, bedding torn apart. But worst of all, they had found the loose floorboard where Thomas had kept his journal and the small box containing their few valuables. They took everything of value, she said, kneeling beside the empty hiding place. Thomas's journal, my mother's locket, the deed to our claim. Wyatt knelt beside her. The deed can be replaced at the land office in Tucson. As for the journal, if Blackwater thinks it leads to gold, he'll follow it, away from here. Hannah nodded, trying to take comfort in that thought. Let's gather what we can salvage. They worked for several hours, sorting through the mess, collecting clothing, kitchenware, and personal items that the Outlaws had deemed worthless. Hannah was grateful to find that many of Emma's things had been left untouched, including a small cloth doll that Thomas had bought for her in Tucson, and a quilt Hannah's mother had made before she died. By mid-afternoon, the wagon was loaded with everything worth taking, and Hannah stood in the yard, looking at the small homestead that had been her dream and her heartbreak. We can repair the door and windows before we leave, Wyatt offered. Secure it as best we can. Hannah shook her head. There's no point. I can't come back here, not with Blackwater and his men knowing about this place. She fought back tears. I'll have to sell the claim if I can without the deed. Wyatt was silent for a moment, then said, "There's no rush to decide. You and Emma are welcome at the Broken Spur for as long as you need." Hannah turned to him, studying his face for any sign of reluctance or obligation, but found only sincerity. "Why are you doing all this for us? You don't even know me." Wyatt's gaze was steady. "I know enough. I know you're a woman trying to protect her child and make a life in a harsh land. I know what it's like to be alone against long odds." He paused. "And I know that out here we have to look out for each other. It's the only way any of us survive." Hannah nodded, understanding. The frontier bred its own code of honor among decent folk, a willingness to help strangers that wasn't charity so much as mutual survival. Still, Wyatt had gone far beyond what most would do. "Thank you," she said simply. They secured the cabin as best they could and began the journey back to the Broken Spur as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Hannah insisted on earning her keep at the ranch, helping Mrs. Lopez with cooking and household tasks, even learning to make soap and candles from the older woman's expert instruction. Emma thrived in the stable environment, babbling more, pulling herself up on furniture, and charming everyone at the ranch with her sunny disposition. Wyatt rode into town a week after their arrival, and returned with news that the land office had agreed to issue a replacement deed for Hannah's claim. He also reported that Blackwater and his gang had been seen near the Dragoon Mountains, apparently following whatever clues they believed Thomas's journal contained. "They'll be occupied for a while," he told Hannah as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset. Emma was already asleep inside, worn out from a day of exploration and play. "But eventually they'll realize there's no gold, or at least not where they're looking. They might come back looking for more information." Hannah sighed, leaning back in her rocking chair. "I've been thinking about that." "About what to do next?" She hesitated, then continued. "I could sell the claim, use the money to go back east. My aunt in Boston might take us in until I can find work." Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Is that what you want, to go back east?" "No," Hannah admitted. "But what choice do I have? I can't return to the homestead, and I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "You're not imposing," Wyatt said quietly. "Having you and Emma here, it's brought something to this place that was missing." Hannah looked at him, surprised by the admission. Over the past week, she had noticed changes in the ranch house, small touches that made it more of a home. Fresh wildflowers on the dining table, curtains hung at windows that had been bare, laughter echoing through rooms that had previously known only practical conversation. "Still," she said, "I need to make a plan for our future. I owe Emma that much," Wyatt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Whatever you decide, I'll help however I can." As the days passed, Hannah found herself increasingly drawn to Wyatt. He was different from Thomas, quieter, more reserved, with a gravity about him that spoke of difficult experiences. But he was also kind, honest, and possessed a dry humor that occasionally surfaced when he was relaxed. She noticed how gentle he was with Emma, how the normally serious man would smile and even laugh when the baby grabbed his finger or babbled excitedly at the sight of him. And she couldn't help but observe his competence, the way he ran the ranch with firm but fair leadership, the respect his men showed him, his skill with horses and cattle. For his part, Wyatt seemed to seek out Hannah's company whenever his work allowed. He would join her on the porch in the evenings, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. He asked about her life before Arizona, and she learned bits and pieces about his past, raised on a small farm in Missouri, left home at 16 after his mother remarried, worked as a scout for the Army, a shotgun guard for stagecoaches, and briefly as a deputy marshal before purchasing the land that became the Broken Spur. There were gaps in his story, things he didn't elaborate on, but Hannah didn't press. Everyone had aspects of their past they preferred not to discuss. 3 weeks after their arrival at the ranch, news came that changed everything. Mac returned from a supply run to Tucson with a newspaper and a grim expression. "Blackwater's dead," he announced as they gathered for supper. Him and two of his men, cave in at a mine in the Dragoons. Hannah gasped, looking to Wyatt, who was reading the newspaper account with a furrowed brow. Says here they were working a claim illegally, he summarized. The entrance collapsed. A prospector heard the commotion and reported it, but by the time help arrived, it was too late. Was it? Hannah couldn't finish the question. Wyatt seemed to understand. The coordinates match what you told me about your husband's claim. They were following his journal. A complex mix of emotions washed over Hannah: relief that the threat to Emma was gone, sadness that lives had been lost, however deserved, and a strange sense of Thomas's presence, as if he had somehow protected them from beyond the grave. The rest of the gang has apparently scattered, Wyatt continued, folding the newspaper. Without Blackwater, they've lost their leader and their motivation. Does this mean? Hannah began. You're safe now, Wyatt confirmed. You could return to your homestead if you wanted. The words hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken implications. Hannah looked around the table at the faces that had become familiar and dear to her: Mrs. Lopez, Mac, the other hands, and Wyatt, especially Wyatt. I need to think, she said quietly. That night, after Emma was asleep, Hannah sat by the window of their room, looking out at the star-filled sky. The past weeks had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The safe, familiar routine of the ranch, the community of people who had welcomed her and Emma, the growing feeling of belonging, all of it made the thought of returning to the isolated homestead less appealing than it once would have been. And then there was Wyatt. Hannah couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared experiences that was slowly, subtly evolving into something more. She had caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, had felt the gentle brush of his hand against hers when they reached for the same object, had noticed how his voice softened when he spoke to her. Thomas would want her to be happy, to find someone who would be a father to Emma. But was she ready? And was she reading too much into Wyatt's kindness? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Wyatt standing there, his expression serious. I'm sorry to disturb you, he said. But I wanted to talk to you before you made any decisions about what to do next. Hannah nodded, stepping into the hallway and partially closing the door to avoid waking Emma. I was just thinking about that. Wyatt took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. I know you've only been here a short time, and I understand if this seems sudden, but he paused, seeming to search for the right words. I'd like you and Emma to stay permanently. Hannah's heart quickened. As your guest, no, Wyatt said, his blue eyes holding her steadily. As my wife. If you'd consider it. Though she had begun to sense his feelings, the directness of the proposal took Hannah by surprise. Wyatt, you don't need to answer now, he said quickly. I know it's a lot to consider, and I know you're still grieving Thomas. But I want you to know that option exists. Hannah studied his face in the dim light of the hallway. Why? She asked softly. Why would you want to marry a widow with a child? Wyatt's expression softened. Because in the few weeks you've been here, this place has become a home in a way it never was before. Because Emma's laugh is the best sound I've heard in years. Because you're the strongest, kindest woman I've ever met. He paused, then added more quietly, and because I find myself thinking about you all the time, wondering what you're doing when I'm out with the cattle, looking forward to seeing you when I come back to the house. Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Wyatt replied. That's all I'm asking for now. Hannah nodded. I will. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Good night, Hannah. Good night, she whispered. After he left, Hannah returned to the window, her mind and heart racing. Wyatt's proposal had forced her to confront feelings she had been trying to ignore: the growing attachment she felt toward him, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, the sense of rightness she felt at the broken spur. Was it too soon after Thomas? Would accepting Wyatt's proposal dishonor her first husband's memory? Or would Thomas want her to seize this chance at happiness, at security for their daughter? Hannah didn't sleep much that night, but by morning, she had made her decision. She found Wyatt in the corral, working with a young horse. He saw her approaching and handed the lead rope to one of the ranch hands, then came to meet her at the fence. Emma was on her hip, playing with a lock of Hannah's hair. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Hannah said without preamble. Wyatt nodded, his expression careful, giving nothing away. "And I think I would like to accept, but I have conditions." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm listening." "First, I want to be your partner, not just your wife. I want to help run this ranch, make decisions together." Wyatt nodded. "Agreed." "Second, I want Emma to know about Thomas as she grows up, to understand he was a good man who loved her very much." "Of course," Wyatt said softly. "I would never want to replace him in her memory." Hannah took a deep breath. "And third, I want us to be honest with each other, no secrets. If we're going to build a life together, it has to be founded on truth." Wyatt was silent for a moment, his blue eyes searching hers. "That's fair," he said finally. "Though you should know, there are parts of my past that aren't pleasant to talk about." "I'm not asking for a full accounting of your life before we met," Hannah clarified. "Just honesty between us moving forward." Wyatt nodded, then reached out to take her free hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "In that spirit of honesty, I should tell you that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, Hannah. I can't promise it will always be easy, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to make you and Emma happy." Hannah smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "That's all I ask." Emma, sensing the importance of the moment, reached out toward Wyatt with a happy babble. He laughed and took her from Hannah's arms, settling her comfortably against his chest as if he'd been holding babies all his life. "What do you think, little one?" he asked Emma seriously. "Should your mama and I get married?" Emma responded by grabbing his bandana and stuffing it into her mouth, making both adults laugh. "I'll take that as approval," Wyatt said, gently extracting the cloth from her grip. Looking at them together, this strong, quiet man who had saved them, and the daughter who represented everything good from her past, Hannah felt a certainty she hadn't expected. This was right. This was the next chapter of their story. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who came through the area monthly. It was a simple ceremony in the ranch yard, with the Hands, Mrs. Lopez and her family, and a few neighbors as witnesses. Hannah wore a new dress Wyatt had ordered from Tucson, and Emma, now crawling with determination and pulling herself up on everything in sight, wore a tiny white dress Mrs. Lopez had sewn for her. As they spoke their vows under the vast Arizona sky, Hannah felt Thomas's presence one last time, not as a shadow or a regret, but as a blessing. She would always love him, always honor his memory, but her heart had opened to love again, different but no less real. That night, after Emma was asleep in her crib in the nursery adjoining their bedroom, Hannah and Wyatt came together as husband and wife. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe she was his. For Hannah, the physical expression of their union felt like a confirmation of the rightness of her choice, two people who had found each other against the odds, creating something beautiful from the harsh realities of frontier life. In the months that followed, they settled into a rhythm as a family. Hannah took on more responsibilities at the ranch, proving herself adept at bookkeeping and even helping with the cattle when extra hands were needed. Wyatt was a patient teacher, showing her how to ride better, how to use a rifle to protect herself, how to read the land and whether to anticipate the needs of the livestock. Emma thrived, taking her first steps, speaking her first words, growing from a baby into a toddler who charmed everyone at the ranch with her adventurous spirit and infectious laugh. She followed Wyatt like a shadow whenever he was around the house, and he indulged her interest in everything, answering her endless questions with a patience that sometimes amazed Hannah. They faced challenges, of course. A drought threatened the cattle, forcing Wyatt and his men to drive them farther for water and grass. Hannah fell ill with a fever that kept her bedridden for a week, leaving Wyatt to care for Emma and worry over his wife simultaneously. The bank in Tucson threatened foreclosure when a payment was delayed due to a robbery of the mail coach carrying their bank draft. But they weathered each storm together, emerging stronger for the trials they faced. And a year after their wedding, their family grew when Hannah gave birth to a son they named James Thomas Adamson, James for Wyatt's father, Thomas for Hannah's first husband. As Hannah nursed her son one evening on the porch, watching Wyatt teach Emma to ride her first pony in the yard, she reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them all together. The tragedy that had taken Thomas, the outlaws who had threatened her and Emma, the single shot Wyatt had fired that had changed everything. Each painful or frightening moment had been a step toward this life they now shared. Wyatt looked up, catching her eye across the yard, and smiled that rare, full smile that transformed his serious face and made her heart skip even now. Emma waved excitedly from atop the gentle pony, calling, "Look, Mama, I'm riding." "I see you, sweetheart," Hannah called back. "You're doing wonderfully." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hannah offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the man who had saved them with a single shot and brought them home in his arms, for the love that had blossomed in the aftermath of fear, for the family they had created together, not replacing what was lost, but building something new and precious from the foundations of the past. In the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona Territory, they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found home. Years passed, and the broken spur prospered under their joint stewardship. Emma grew into a capable, spirited young woman with her mother's determination and her stepfather's quiet strength. James was joined by two sisters, Sarah and Elizabeth, completing their family. Sometimes, on clear nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Hannah and Wyatt would sit on the porch after the children were asleep, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, and remember how it all began. "Do you ever think about that day?" Hannah would ask. "When you heard my scream and came riding over that ridge," and Wyatt would tighten his arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day," he would answer. "It was the luckiest shot I ever fired," but they both knew it wasn't luck at all. It was destiny, written in the vast skies and rugged landscapes of the land they loved. The story of an outlaw's threat, a cowboy's courage, and the family forged in a single moment of bravery and hope.